Chapter 23, Lecture 2 is going to kind of start out by talking about why we should not use pesticides. Well, the big reason is it does accelerate genetic resistance of insects. So the more we apply pesticides, the more they become resistant. They are what is called R-selected species, so they reproduce really fast, thus are able to genetically become resistant very quickly. There are new emergence of diseases, of course, in the tropics, and could it be related to this? Pests do build immunity, which of course does cause farmers more money. What we have occurring is something called a pesticide treadmill, where it takes more and more of the pesticide for less effective treatment of pest organisms. Kind of the same idea where if you take a Tylenol, one Tylenol may start getting rid of your headache, but then over years it takes many Tylenol. So we're seeing that treadmill. Kind of just a picture of an aerial sprayer. We still do use those for big fields, even here in Wisconsin. Pesticides, the good thing is, or the bad thing, is they do kill beneficial species. That's one of the reasons in the great state of Wisconsin that we don't have many honeybees anymore, because they are broad spectrum pesticides, which means that they kill more than just their intended target, and our honeybees are getting ravished by these, and of course we need those for things like honey and of course for pollination. Minor pesticides can become very destructive over time. We know they can disrupt the food chain. Even though mosquitoes are a huge annoyance to us, they are part of our food chain. 95% of that spray that you saw in that last picture does end up in the air, maybe in the surface, maybe even in the groundwater and the food that we eat. Millions of workers are poisoned each year because they don't wear the proper equipment like respirators, and these pesticides can lead to premature cancers. Linked to pesticide use is childhood leukemia, Parkinson's disease. It is deemed that a lot of times farmers are the ones that are getting the Parkinson's disease. That's not an absolute study by any means, though. Immune system disorders and breast and prostate cancers can actually result from pesticides. They've really not reduced insect use. So we've really not reduced the amount of insects by any means. They just keep modifying and adjusting toward our pesticide use. The reality is pesticide use costs between $100 and $200 billion worldwide. Pest management, which we're going to talk about later, integrated pest management actually works significantly more realistic. A couple of pesticide regulation techniques. There's something called the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, known as FIFRA, established in 1947, amended in 1972. It does require the EPA approval for pesticide use, and the EPA does regulate the amount of residue on food. Now, the food can have some pesticide residue on it, but it can't be a lot because, of course, if we eat that food, something like red peppers are prone to getting pesticide and keeping them in there because of their soft tissue. Grapes have a lot of pesticides on them. Well, we got to limit how much we intake. The EPA has banned 56 active pesticides in the last 34 years. That's kind of a lot, but there's probably a lot more that should be banned. Most of those are chlorinated hydrocarbons. Remember, as I said before, like DDT is a chlorinated hydrocarbon there. 1996 Food Quality Protection Act, known as the FQPA, increased public protection from pesticides. Again, an update, so we have even more protection, so we're not ingesting those pesticides. There are banned chemicals, unfortunately, that are still made here and exported to other countries, and we kind of see that coming back in our food. The pesticide industry does deny harmful chemicals, of course, and there's what's called a circle of poison. So DDT was an example. Even though it was banned in 1972 in the United States, we sent it to other countries, and it's coming back. We're also seeing things like wind taking those pesticides and bringing them up to the polar regions and devastating the polar bears up there, DDT in their system. So DDT was deemed a very cheap and effective means of getting rid of insects, particularly mosquitoes. It's broad spectrum, though, so it kills all those little bugs. The EPA was established in 1970, which really correlated to this. You can actually see the machine down there, and I actually, as a child, can remember chasing one of those with my bike with the DDT being sent out behind it. It was banned in 1972. It did kill many beneficial insects along with those mosquitoes. It did a great job on the mosquitoes, trust me, but it also killed a lot of other things. It does remain in the environment for up to 15 years, so it's called a persistent organic pollutant. It's magnified in food webs, so the higher you go up in a food web, the more it's going to stay. It does reduce populations of birds, too, because they're going to eat things like spiders, which have these pesticides in them, and it just magnifies from there. It causes cancer in humans. It's a carcinogen. It's becoming less effective. It was made in the U.S. until 1996 in New York and still sent to other countries, so we're seeing that circle of poison coming back to us because it's used in other countries, and things like even coffee beans. We do have newer organophosphates that have proven to be worse, and they're still used in 25 countries, so it's not the worst though. Rachel Carson, key player, she wrote Silent Spring, of course, which brought our attention to the effects of DDT and how it relates to our environment. There are alternatives to conventional pesticides, which we'll take a look at in class. There's what's called an economic threshold, that point at which economic losses caused by pests outweigh costs of applying pesticides. So the reality is, if pests, no matter how much pesticide we put on, are causing too much damage, cost too much money, why even bother? There's cosmetic pesticides applied to ensure blemish-free fruits and veggies. So like your tomatoes might have these cosmetic pesticides on them to make them look really nice, or even apples. The problem is you're going to eat that stuff. We need to do things like rotating crops to get rid of the bugs. If you plant potatoes every year again, you're going to get potato beetles. Timing of planting to starve the pests, of course. If bugs are only out, for example, in May, let's not plant stuff until June. Polyculture, good idea. We talked about that. Cut the grass short, like in your yard. Instead of spraying for weeds all the time, just cut it short, and that'll kill the weeds, and they can't reproduce. They can't flower and reproduce. And of course, engineering too. A couple other ways. We have biological pest control. Biological is a natural way to do it. You can see the picture there where the wasp is actually is a parasite to the gypsy moth. We have gypsy moths around here, so the idea of maybe introducing this wasp to kill it. The problem with that is maybe that wasp may take off and push out our wasps. It does focus on select targets, though. They tend to be non-toxic. They do minimize genetic resistance, and they do save money. Problem with biological control is it tends to be very slow acting and difficult to apply, and those controls may become pests. The reason we have those Asiatic beetles here in Wisconsin is they were introduced to eat aphids, I believe from the tobacco or cotton crops down in the Carolinas, and they've done so well. They've spread all the way up here, and they've pushed out our native species of beetles. We could use insect birth control, which disrupts the life cycle. Pheromones are oftentimes used now too. Pheromones are a smell that lures pests in the trap. So you put pheromones out and it lures all those pests away, thinking that they're going to reproduce, and then they're destroyed. We could spray hot water in crops. That's what's done a lot of times down in Florida with the citrus. So we don't want to destroy the citrus at all or anything, or put pesticides on it, so they spray hot water on it, maybe a little soapy water too. Controversial is even exposing food to gamma radiation. Gamma radiation does an effective job at killing these bugs and bacteria alike. However, are there any side effects to having gamma radiation? Integrated pest management is a very important topic to talk about. The aim of this is to reduce crop damage to an economically tolerable level. Fields must be monitored carefully. There's really three aspects to this. You can use biological control, use mechanical control, in other words, going out and physically taking the bugs off, which oftentimes in a big field is not realistic, and you still do apply some pesticides. So we want to get rid of as many bugs as we can, but the reality is we can't get rid of all the bugs. Pesticides are deemed allowed for this. The advantage or disadvantages: initial higher cost. We need expert knowledge. Farmers need to go get trained in this. And it does have slower action than conventional pesticides. If we just put pesticides on, it's going to kill everything. IPM doesn't kill everything right away. It tries to use other, more natural methods even to get them. Many scientists have urged the USDA to use 3 strategies to promote integrated pest management in the United States. Sales tax on pesticides, kind of raise that up a little bit so farmers don't buy it, and then we use that sales tax to incorporate IPM. Maybe establish federally supported IPM demonstrations for farmers. That's going on a lot. Train USDA personnel. The pesticide industry, of course, does oppose this. We'll talk about this a little bit more in class. That's it for 23.